We will now start the first conference with the Prime Minister Kishida. First, the Prime Minister makes remarks. Please.
Thank you. And today, I'd like to talk about Japan's further sanctions on Russia for the aggression on Ukraine. Then that is going to be my main topic. Russia has been engaged in atrocities and humanitarian activities, and those activities are going on in Bucha around Kyiv, and they are taking place one after another in various places in Ukraine. To date, Russia has murdered civilians and launched attacks on nuclear power plants. This is indeed a serious violation of international humanitarian laws. We can never accept what was done by Russia. This is indeed a war crime. We really have to put Russia to account for its serious and unhumanitarian activities done by Russia. It is in this respect that Japan is going to support investigations done by ICC and independent examinations and investigations by United Nations. Then we will go ahead of the curve to pay our financial contribution to the ICC. They'd like to give support to the prosecutors ICC to carry out their investigations on war crimes. Then last night, I condemned in a very strong manner and language of atrocities made by the Russian army. I showed my solidarity to Ukraine. There was a G7 leaders' announcement to take additional sanctions against Russia. Then there was an announcement by the G7 nations. In response to the announcement of G7 leaders, Japan is going to impose additional sanctions with 5 pillars, which I'm going to talk about. Japan is going to put more pressure, diplomatic pressure, economic pressure on Russia. We really have to put the brake on the escalation of the situations. We really have to realize that ceasefire as soon as possible to stop the Russian aggression. We have to carry out very strong sanctions on Russia in unity with the international community. First, we will put the ban on coal imports from Russia. As soon as possible, we will try to find alternative suppliers of coal. And by reducing coal imports from Russia in phases, then we can reduce the Japan reliance on Russia for energy supplies. There might be the crunch on power in summer, in winter. We have to avoid it from taking place. The recycling and using the nuclear power plants, we have to leverage the most effective power sources such as energy securities and decarbonization. The second matter is introduction of import bans from Russia, machines and some types of timbers and vodka. For those commodities, we will introduce a measure to put the ban on the imports of those commodities from Russia. The third, we will introduce a ban on new investments going to Russia. We will move in lockstep with G7 nations, and we will do an immediate introduction of the measure. The fourth is the further enhancement of financial sanctions. Russia's biggest bank, Sberbank and Alpha Bank, they are the major financial institutions of Russia. We will put the freeze on the assets of those financial institutions. Then fifth, we will expand the subjects and objects of asset freeze. About 400 Russian army officials and the lawmakers, about 20 the military-related organizations, including state-run companies, are subject to sanctions taken by Japan. By so doing, about 550 individuals will come under the asset freeze sanctions and involving about 40 organizations of Russia. Next, let me talk about Japan's support to the people of Ukraine as well as a protection to the Japanese nationals in Ukraine. There are 2 points I'd like to mention. Then first, we'd like to make a personal contribution to the neighboring countries around Ukraine. Already in Moldova, we have dispatched the needs investigation team of JICA. Then health and medical areas and demand and needs are under investigation by Japan. Side by side with the WHO, we try to make a contribution to the management of medical data in the affected regions starting this week. And we have sent the government investigation team of PKO. We will listen to what people in those regions have to say. Then we'd like to immediately realize the personal contribution on top of what I have mentioned. The second point I'd like to mention is acceptance of evacuees from Ukraine and the protection support to the Japanese nationals living in Ukraine. I made a statement yesterday. There are evacuees from Ukraine, and for the smooth transportation of those evacuees to Japan, for the time being, every week, and we secure the seats of direct flights between Poland to Japan. Then we will give support to the transportation of those people to Japan. Today, the first flight is going to start from Poland to Japan. On Japanese nationals living in Ukraine, in case they find it difficult for them to come to Japan by themselves, we will make it possible for those people to come to Japan on the flight. By Russia's aggression on Ukraine, the prices of energies and foodstuff are skyrocketing. Not only Japan, but people all over the world are suffering from the skyrocketing prices of gasoline, the utility charges, and foodstuff. We really have to stabilize the energy market. A statement was made yesterday by myself. We're going to work in cooperation with IEA member countries, Japan, the allocation, and we have decided to release the 15 million barrels of crude oil from national reserves, which is 1.5 times of allocation assigned by IEA to Japan. This is the first of its kind, the national release of national petroleum reserves of Japan. And we will go the extra mile to do what we can do. There is another government measure. Crude oil prices are growing, then commodity prices are reaching the ceiling, and there is a negative impact on people's life in Japan. We have to work out the measures urgently and flexibly by the end of this month. Then we will come up with a comprehensive emergency measure on crude oil prices and commodity price hikes. We really have to protect the life of people, both in Japan and outside of Japan. Then we will lose no time in working out the maximum countermeasures, both in Japan and abroad. We have to put the brake on the violent aggression by Russia, and this is a crunch time for us to protect the international order. I'd like to ask for your understanding and cooperation to what we're going to do. The other day, Mr. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, made a speech in the Japanese Diet. He said Japan was the first country to put pressure on Russia in Asia. Then he said that he wants Japan to continue its sanctions against Russia. For Russia to become peace seeker, then he said that let us try very hard. This is indeed a serious wish of the president to the people in Japan. We will respond to what he had said in the Japanese Diet. There will be close cooperation between Japan and the international community, including G7 nations. Japan, the international community, we will never the aggression made by Russia. And the sympathy of people in Japan goes with the people in Ukraine, that we take resolute actions. Then we'd like to show the commitment to Ukraine and to take the side of the people of Ukraine who are suffering right now. Thank you.
Now we open the floor for questions. The nominated media, please proceed to the microphone and ask one question. First, TV Tokyo, Shinohara-san, please. This is Shinohara from TV Tokyo. Regarding additional sanction, Prime Minister said the Russian coal import to be banned, and there will be a reduction of our reliance of energy to Russia. That's what you said. The crude oil and coal dependency should be eliminated. That's what the European leaders have said. And the reduction of the import related to other energy source from Russia, what is your take on that? Basically, with G7 nations, cooperation with the G7 nation will be a priority. Earlier, I've said G7 summit leader statement from Russia, the core import ban included. The energy reliance on Russia should be lessened, planned and prompt implementation, and the Russian crude oil reliance reduction should be accelerated. That's what's stipulated in the summit leader's statement. That is the basic policy I want to pursue. Therefore, as Japan, the coal embargo and the crude oil included overall energy reliance on Russia. That's what I am going to seek. In going forward, additional measures. At this point, I refrain from making comment on prediction, but G7 policy will be the basis, and we continue to collaborate with international community and take appropriate actions.
Then Ishigaki from Gigi. This is Ichigaki from Gigi. Let me ask you a question. The spokesman the Harvard Russian Foreign Ministry mentioned Japan's sanctions against Russia. Then what Japan is doing is destroying the long-standing relationship between the two countries, and she said Russia is going to take retaliatory actions. Please let me know what the Prime Minister Kishida is going to do in response to what was mentioned by the spokesperson. I'd like to refrain from making a comment on a statement given by somebody, spokesperson of the Russian government. But what's happening right now? Everything comes from Russia's aggression on Ukraine. That's my understanding of the current situation. However, Russia is trying to transfer the responsibility to Japan. This is indeed unlawful action. We can never accept what Russia has announced. As I said just now, then Japan is going to work with the G7 nations, the international community. Then we're going to work step by step and side by side with them. We have to take a resolute attitude. We have to give humanitarian support to the people in need.
From now on, I open the floor to all media on the floor. Please raise your hand. I will nominate you, and when you are nominated, please proceed to the microphone and limit your question to one question, please. Nihon TV, Yamazaki-san, please. Nihon TV, Yamazaki. Foreign Ministry announced 8 Russian diplomats to be expelled, and what was the ground of the judgment? Yes, earlier, Foreign Ministry made an announcement. 8 the Russian diplomat in Japan and also the officers of the Russian trade representative we requested to leave Japan. Regarding this matter, comprehensive decision was given to notify our request to leave our country based on the current situation of Ukraine. And further details, they're same for all countries. I refrain from making further comments.
Mr. Shijima from Fuji TV, please go ahead. This is Sejima from Fuji TV. Can I ask a follow-up question on the topic? Russia said that it is going to take countermeasures against Japan. Any impact on the protection of Japanese nationals in the region? How the Japanese government react to do? I understand that Russia has mentioned that it is going to take countermeasures against Japan, but specific measures are yet to be disclosed at this moment. Therefore, I'd like to refrain from talking about that point. But anyhow, continuously, there are Japanese nationals living in Russia, Japanese companies doing business in Russia. We really have to protect their activities, their presence. Then we really have to make no mistakes about giving protection to those people and organizations.
Jen's Defense Weekly, my name is Takahashi. Regarding security surrounding Japan, based on the Russia's aggression against Ukraine, the threat, do you think the threat in this region it has increased? Because Russia is a Pacific nation and there are northern territorial issues Japan has with Russia. And is there a concern? Now you said this is a critical time to maintain the peace and international discipline. Japan is enhancing the international discipline and the passage of a Taiwan channel. Do you have any idea? Because French Navy, the General Ray I've interviewed, and the passage of the Taiwan Strait, there is no concern. And I again also interviewed Japanese naval chief of staff, but Japan as a nation to abide by the international law, and do you have any plan to send a message on this front? First, the current Russia's aggression against Ukraine, the situation caused by that aggression, it shakes the foundation of the international order. And in the current situation surrounding Japan, the Russian forces' activity is increasing. This is a situation of concern. And regarding these activities, we continue to have a grave concern, and we need to stay on alert and monitor the government, the surrounding Japan, Russian forces activity. We continue to collect the intelligence and conduct a surveillance. And our defense policy and defense capability development. Specific country or region, we do not have in mind, but new national security strategy is going to be established, and we are not going to eliminate any option. We will consider realistically and also with a sense of speed. Fundamentally, we are going to bolster defense capability. That's what's important. In your second question, you pointed out the specific action. Currently, there is no concrete plan, no plan.
次に、
The Japan Ford Rosette. This is Rosette from Japan Ford. Can I ask you a different question away from the Ukraine? Can I ask a question about the border control measures? In March, the Japanese government did a review on the border measures. Then when some conditions are met, such as business persons coming to Japan, then they can be accepted in Japan for new entries. But this didn't include the tourists coming to Japan. Then I wonder when the Japanese government is going to relax conditions for people coming to Japan for tourist purposes. You asked a question about the border control measures taken by the Japanese government. First off, in Japan, in March the 1st, the new entry of foreign people to Japan have been allowed by the government. But as you said, for the measure wasn't applied to people coming to Japan for tourist purposes. And we made a policy expanding the measure to non-tourist people. The number of people coming to Japan is 10,000, then the scope and number has been expanding. You asked a question about tourists who would like to come to Japan. For tourists, going forward, we look at how the infection is going for COVID-19 in Japan, then we look at what other nations are doing. And in the countermeasures against the COVID-19 infection, we like to make a right judgment looking at what's happening in the world. We don't have any specific schedule and starting when the tourists are allowed to come to Japan. But we have a series of border control measures. We like to make a judgment based on what's happening or what is going to happen on COVID-19 infection in Japan.
Kyoto Shimbun. My name is Kishida. In the beginning, you remarked that evacuees from Ukraine and regarding the support measures for the evacuees in various municipalities, how the evacuees can be supported, housings and the livelihood expenses and languages, for example. And if the evacuation period gets longer and number of evacuees increases, then the municipality's burden will be bigger. Therefore, as the government, toward the municipality, what is the government's stance and the menu of assistance and support you have in plan? Ukraine evacuees, as we accept them, many municipalities and private companies, various groups and bodies offered support, which is very encouraging. That's my take. And we work with them and to accept evacuees smoothly. But now, as a measures, those evacuees, to each one of them, what will be the support we can provide? That is a perspective we have right now. And looking at qualifying the content of the support, and you talked about the municipalities, government's assistance to municipalities, and Chief Cabinet Secretary. Under the Chief Cabinet Secretary, there is a coordination meeting. They will consider in going forward. That is a process to support evacuees for them to live in Japan. The measures will be prepared.
Mr. Ishii from Hokkaido Shimbun, please go ahead. This is Ishii from Hokkaido Shimbun. And just now, can I ask a question about the measure to expel Russian diplomats? By expelling those diplomats, I wonder if the measure might lead to the closure of the dialogues between Japan and Russia, such as fisheries negotiations, such as Northern Territories negotiations. On the measure to expel Russian diplomats from Japan, I made my statement clear. Do you ask a question about the possible impact on Japan. How Russia is going to react to what Japan is going to do, and there are many assumptions. But as I said just now, specific measures are yet to be clear by Russia. So at this juncture, I'd like to refrain from disclosing my ideas based on assumptions. First off, Japan's response. Then we will make it clear that what Japan is going to do. We have related countries, and we have to have understanding of the people in Japan about what Japan is going to do in the point.
Asahi Shimbun, my name is Ikejiri. Related to aggression against Ukraine, G7 and international meetings, if Russia attends those international meetings, such as a G7 meeting, G20 meeting, U.S. said that the U.S. will not attend. And you have there is a plan for the Vladimir Putin to attend one of those international meetings. And what is your take on that? Regarding G20, international community sees the Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and based on that, the relationship cannot be maintained. That's how the international community takes. In the recent G7 meeting, international agencies and multilateral forums having activity with Russia like the past cannot be continued. That is the consensus. And our response to G20, participation of Russia to G20. The chairmanship nation, Indonesia, and G20 members, we need to discuss regarding Russia's attendance. And also, we need to be well based on the situation and take an appropriate action. At this point, I do not want to make any prediction.
次の方。
So Mr. Yamaguchi from Tokyo Shimbun, please go ahead. This is Yamaguchi from Tokyo and Chunichi Shimbun. The Russia's aggression on Ukraine, in response to that, Japan is quite active in accepting the Ukraine, the evacuees. Then likewise, people who are prosecuted and who sacrifice their lives. And there are people, Syria, Afghanistan, Myanmar, there are those refugees. And Japanese government is not active at all in accepting refugees from those nations. The issue is the same. The issue is about the humanitarian matter. I think Japanese government should have given the equal treatment to those refugees. I wonder if Japanese government is trying to give protection to the evacuees coming from nations other than Ukraine. Then by the revising immigration control law, I wonder if Japanese government is going to have a system to give support to the evacuees by preparing a measure under the Immigration Control Act. I mentioned a statement about the evacuees from Ukraine. Japanese stance to those people goes as follows. And in terms of humanitarian aspects, we have to do what we have to do. And we have taken various steps indeed to the end. You ask that question, if or not Japanese government is going to generalize those measures, and then whether Japan is prepared to do something for refugees from other regions in the world. On what we are doing right now, then we, based on the needs and requirements of affected regions, in the coordination meeting, they'd like to think about what Japan can do. Whether or not Japan is going to expand the scope of discussion for general purposes, Japan's response to refugees and our basic stance to refugees is going to be discussed. And separately, then based on the discussions going to that, I believe the government has to take a measure on that matter. But on this spot, whether or not Japan is going to make a change in the policy, then that is off the mind of myself. That is going to be an important matter, issue for the government. How the Japanese government is going to do, then we look at what's happening in the international arena, then that's a point we have to think about based on those factors.
していきます。産経新聞
Sankei Shimbun, I am Tamara. My question is about China. G7 is strengthening the sanctions against Russia, and China. There is a concern that China may create a gap in terms of a sanction being enforced against Russia. And if Russia is supported by China, including a supply of military goods, and is there a possibility for Japan to impose sanctions against China in that event? Last night, it was announced G7 summit leaders' statement. The avoidance of sanction and roundabout and backfill for those actions, the sanctions will be strengthened, and we as Japan, using crypto asset avoidance of a sanction is something that we watch, and we are strengthening the sanction, and we have already submitted a revision bill of the Foreign Currency and Trade Act. China and Russia, these two nations recently, they are maintaining the close relationship in multilateral levels toward China. We have been calling for responsible actions, and we continue to work closely with G7 nations to respond to the situation. The loophole of the sanction should not be created. And on that front, we closely cooperate with G7 and international community to strengthen the diplomatic and financial measures, the sanctions against Russia. And based on that policy, we will work. And your question on the potential sanction against China, that is the, I will not answer on that question.
Next question comes from reporter Mr. Miyai from Yomiuri. This is Miyai from Yomiuri Shimbun. Can I ask a question about Japan's restrictions on coal imports from Russia in phases? This is what you've mentioned. Japan then buys a lot of coal from Russia, but you said in phases. And what is the duration you have in mind on the measure you have mentioned? Japan's the import ban on Russian coal. Russian coal has been utilized in various parts of Japan, not only utility companies, but manufacturing cement and steel manufacturing, making other applications of Russian coal. And based on the situation, we have to understand the reality of the Russian coal utilization in various sectors of Japan's industry. We have to come up with alternative measures, alternative sources, suppliers of coal, so that we can realize a ban on coal imports from Russia. That is the flow I have in mind. You ask a question about how long do you have to wait before seeing a complete ban on the coal imports from Russia. Based on the situations, then we have to confirm the alternative sources of coal from other nations. Then based on that, I believe we have to think about exactly when Japan is going to do that. I'd like to refrain from showing a specific duration of the measure. In various industrial sectors, and appropriate measures will be taken. So at the end of the day, I'd like to move in the direction of a complete ban on the Russian coal imports to this country. And in case you have questions, and please send your questions in writing, then we will respond to your questions in form of documents and after this press meeting. And thank you, and I'd like to thank your cooperation for this press meeting. Thank you.